Recording in progress. Recording in progress. Recording in progress.
Hello, I'm trying to watch this meeting and I can't hear anything. I can't see anybody. What's going on? How can I get into the meeting, please?
Hello, Sue.
We can hear you, Sue.
Okay, this is weird. There's nobody else here. All right, there's the
So-
meeting picture.
Yes,
can hear
for
you
the
fine.
participants,
I guess she can't hear us. Can you hear us?
we can now hear you, Councilmember
Yes.
Lowing.
Now we can hear you. So please start over from the beginning because we couldn't get in until now.
Are you asking to speak about something in housing or for this item or no?
I wanted to be able to hear. I could see
Okay,
nothing
all right,
or hear
that's-
nothing until
All right,
this.
that's a success. You're in.
Yes, we're in.
Okay.
That was the big problem. So now that we're in, I don't need to talk maybe later, but not till I find
Yeah.
out what's going on.
Okay, so are there any other online? Are there any other people that want to speak on items that are not on our agenda? Okay.
Amy Ashton.
Hello?
Ms. Ashton, did you want to speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes?
Oh, excellent. Good evening. I just wanted to say, Amy Ashton, Palo Alto Forward. We're really happy that you've started this committee. We're excited to see the topics you pick up for these meetings. I don't have anything particularly relevant to the agenda item to add, but only that we're excited to see what you take up given where we are with the housing element. There'll be a lot of work to come, especially in implementing all the policy and zoning changes that are going to be needed. So I'm like I said, we're just excited that this committee is here and look forward to working with you and can't wait to see the next agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that concludes open public comment. We're going to go ahead with the staff presentation on the item that's on the agenda before we take public comment on that. And I think we'll turn that to Director Jonathan Layton.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Lowing. Good evening to both of you, Vice Mayor Stone. I know there's been some comments, folks not hearing us online. I apologize for the rough start. For folks that are online, we had 4 public speakers, actually 5 public speakers, speaking about items that were not related to the not on the agenda today. So you haven't missed the subject item for which we're talking about. To those in the audience, apologize that our backs are to you. This is not the most efficient way, I guess, for presenting, but I will acknowledge some names. I've introduced again the council members. I'm Jonathan Late. I'm the Director of Planning and Development Services. I'm joined with a number of staff throughout City Hall, which we're happy to introduce ourselves as we begin to speak, or you can get us afterwards if you'd like to know more. So thank you for your indulgence on that. I have a really brief presentation. We have a staff report that we've published online. There were some copies available on the table, and there were a couple of copies of the PowerPoint presentation that you'll see. Medina, if you don't mind, we can go to the next slide. Okay. So we wanted to meet with the ad hoc. The ad hoc members will remember, and for the public, an ad hoc housing ad hoc committee was formed to talk about matters, housing related. And one of the items that was previously going to go to the Policy and Services Committee, another committee of the council, this item, this rental registry program, was deferred to the housing ad hoc. So that's why we're here today, and not before the Policy and Services. Today we'll provide a brief overview on a rental registry program. That's the ordinance that is included in the packet. We'll talk about some considerations that we would like the ad hoc members to think about, and then we would like to receive some feedback, either back to staff for direction to do some additional work or analysis, or if you're able to form a recommendation, and then we can schedule it on for the city council. So we can talk about that timing. Next slide, please. Oh, and as I mentioned that, I guess I think just to provide it into context, in late 2021, the city council had a number of renter protection items that you directed staff to follow up on. They were prioritized, and just to highlight, this one that we're discussing today was one of the higher priorities on the item. It also took some of the longest work to do. So we'll talk a little bit about it today. But in 2022, we expanded tenant relocation assistance. That was an action by the council, and we've recently updated it and made some additional changes to it. There's an eviction reduction ordinance that the city council adopted in summer of 2023. There's an anti-rent gouging direction that we received that is in part covered by state law right now. Locally, we have not advanced that item. It was a lower priority task, and so we haven't done any work on that one, but we do have it on our radar. There was a security deposit limit that was an ordinance that the city council adopted in June 2023. There is a fair chance ordinance that the city council asked us to initiate, and work is underway on that. We don't have anything yet publicly to share, but we're making progress on that. And then a couple of other items. There was a right to counsel. This is something that we're monitoring right now. Again, a lower priority item, but we will be putting some resources on our website to further that direction. And then lastly, improving implementation of existing renter protection policies. Our colleagues over in Community Services is taking the lead on this and having meetings with the Historic Resources Commission. And I understand there will be an opportunity to present either to this ad hoc or possibly the city council in the next month or two. So we're looking forward to that update. So, but now back to our sort of the main event here. The city council had directed the ad hoc to really look at the design and implementation the fees, the resources, and implementation timeline for a rental registry program. So that's what we want to go over today. Ms. Gamble? Next slide, thank you. So with respect to this specific program, again, we got the direction late 2021. I noted some things that we had done in 2022. For this program, we were able to go to the Policy and Services Committee in late, I don't know if it was fall or winter 2022, September. Okay. And we received some additional, we presented the information that we had at that time, received some feedback, and this is the schedule that we have been working with and anticipate over the next couple of months. Next slide, please. So what's guided us in this this process is a desire to collect some additional information to get better insight into the Palo Alto's rental landscape or environment. And so the council has an interest in creating a registry so that we can make better informed or more informed policy decisions about in this regard. We also have related interests for expanding awareness of existing renter protection programs in Palo Alto, as well as supporting programs that are set forth in the housing element. Next slide, please. The basic program would collect information from landlords that would fall into these different buckets that you see on the slide. In the packet, we have a form that identifies that a draft of the type of information that we would collect through this online registry program. Next slide, please. To implement the rental registry, there's two actions that really need to take place. One is enact a legislation, which is why we have the draft ordinance for the city council's for the ad hoc's consideration. And then there's the back end piece of getting the technology and consultant support to develop the registration form, the administrative procedures, and implement the software. Next slide, please. Next slide has information on the draft ordinance. Some of the key points. We're happy to get into any specifics about that. We're represented by the city's attorney's office, as well as staff that has been engaged in this effort. But in summary, we're introducing a new chapter of the code to specifically enable us to collect this information. We have the way the ordinance is drafted now. It is set to collect data on all rental units. That would include single-family homes that are available for rent, ADUs, duplexes, as well as multifamily buildings with many units. That's how the ordinance is currently drafted. You'll note in the staff report, we've raised some flag that as a possible discussion point, and I can talk about that in a moment, as well as our ability to collect a fee for having some element of cost recovery to the program. Next slide, please. In addition to those changes, there are some minor changes to an existing provision of the municipal code related to Chapter 9.72. This has a lot in this chapter, but one of the things that the council members are aware of is that there's an existing registry program that exists on the books today. It's just that it's not been implemented with any success. So this would surpass that and add a program with more purpose. And next slide, let's see where are you? That's where I am. That's good. Thank you. So as the ad hoc members are contemplating the ordinance and elements of the program, we did want to get some feedback on sort of the universe of units that would be included in the registry program. I think we've heard previously from the Policy and Services Committee that we wanted to capture everything, a wide net, get a bunch of information, and that's fine. We can absolutely do that. I think there's a table in the staff report that talks about some 11,000 plus rental units that would fall under that umbrella. One consideration that this was also shared with the HRC where they announced when they reviewed this program is that for some of these owner occupied units, there was a question about whether to include those, or if we are going to include them, do we want to have a discounted fee or waive the fee for participation in the registry program? From a staff perspective, one of the things that we've been trying to understand is what sort of policies might we develop with data collected from single family homes or from ADUs. The state already authorizes ADUs to be constructed and built regardless of whether they're rented out or not. Understandably, there could be some interesting data that we collect from ADUs, but there may be also another way that we can do that through surveys and not having somebody, a homeowner, to annually go through this process to input their data. At some point, the smaller units may not be, more sort of, I'll use casual term, mom and pop sort of operations. It's not like a professional business where somebody's got a lot of units and they're sort of used to this process of doing a registry. So at some point, we consider 3 units or more in a building to be multifamily. That might be a threshold for you to consider, but we could also do all of the units as well. So we can talk more about that. If we do exempt units from participation in the registry, that's going to raise the participation fees for the remaining units that are in the program. If we're trying to spread the cost of recovery across all of the participants, if you have fewer participants, there's going to be a higher fee because some of the costs stay static or may stay static. But the how that gets diluted is different. We mentioned in the staff report there are some costs associated with the program. We have we anticipate for 3 years of the program, the consultant and initiation costs, implementation costs to be about $250,000. And then we've reported that from some jurisdictions, they have 1 or 2 staff members. Some jurisdictions have reported that 2 staff members is sometimes not enough. We're still assessing what would be necessary here. We do know that we would need a net at least 1 staff member because we don't have the existing resources to administer the program now. But depending on the discussion that we have today, that number may fluctuate. Just for ballpark purposes, so you have it in the back of your mind, at 1 FTE that would likely be a part of this program, fully loaded salary benefits would be you can just round number, somewhere between 175, 200,000, just as a round number for a employee to manage that program. This doesn't include enforcement. Enforcement is another component of the program that we have not factored in yet. And I know this generates some concern from previous discussions about rental protection programs that we've brought before the city council, where we've relied on civil enforcement of the provisions. With this, with the company that we're intending to bring forward to the council, there is some enforcement mechanisms within the software that can be automated and take some of that burden off of staff in terms of alerting a landlord or a property owner that they've not done submitted the form. It could potentially even issue penalties for noncompliance. But at some point, staff's going to have to be involved if we want to continue enforcement at a different level. And so we're still needing to work through that. But if enforcement is a part of this program, that also may have additional implications for staffing, not only at for the program that's administering this, the department that's administering this, but the support operations that may follow it, whether it's code enforcement or the city attorney's office, supporting the hearing officer to have those considerations. So these are all things that we're trying to sort of vet out a little bit more, and happy to answer any questions to the extent that we're able to. And so as I'll end with this, there is some expense, some cost with this, and the city council goes through its budgeting process. You have a list of priorities that you're working on, understanding this program, adding this new program in the context of the other work that you're wanting to see accomplished. We just want you to have that opportunity to sort of weigh those opportunities. Okay, next slide, please. And this is the last slide. We are seeking the ad hoc's feedback. Again, any questions or comments on the program, which I didn't get into a lot of detail in the presentation, but we can answer any questions if you have those. The ordinance that's before you, any feedback on that last slide about the key considerations, and then finally direction to staff to make some adjustments, collect some additional information if we're not ready to go forward to the city council, or if you are ready to go forward and make a recommendation to council, we would welcome that this evening as well. So thank you everyone for your attention, and I'll conclude there.
And if I can just add on, hello, Chantel Cotton Gaines, Deputy City Manager. I think John summarized the program elements very well. I just wanted to make sure the committee was aware that based off the council direction, staff went and developed something that could be a program if you are recommending to the council to move forward with it. And the scale varies. And so we did want to make sure that the committee knew that one of your recommendations to council could be a scaled down version of this program or another priority within all of the council priority objectives that you have as a higher priority than this one. So just wanted to offer that as context. They've done a lot of work to make sure that you had something comprehensive to review, but it is still a choice for the council to consider overall.
Okay, I just want to make a couple of preliminary comments. First of all, just to reiterate what Director Late said, is that there already is one of these. We're not creating recreating the wheel, but it's 20 years out of date and it was sort of not implemented. So we are recreating a wheel. But you know, a core reason for that is that the renter population is big and it's growing, and we're going to add 6,000 new units in the next 8 years. And a lot of those that are most affordable are going to be rentals. So we have to be on top of the data and the trends so we know how to manage that from the standpoint of what's going on out there, quote, in the field. So that's kind of the driving force behind this. I've heard some anecdotal comments of, you know, we're just getting into people's developers' private lives and things like that, which is not the intent at all. And the second thing I want to mention is that, which is that, you know, to get this done, we need developers and we need renters, developers, landlords, and we need renters and we need the city. So it's this kind of partnership that I think we're trying to get with the data and then share it so we can all make the best decisions to provide for, you know, our guaranteed growing population. And just lastly, just to reiterate again, we're 2 of 7 council members. We're not going to make any decisions on this tonight. The whole point of this committee that was just formed is housing just a big deal in our city, and we want to have a couple people on top of it, sort of driving things and sort of pre-processing a lot of things for the council, and so that's sort of our mandate and our goal. Happy to take public comment on this agenda item.
My name is Angie Evans. First, I want to say thank you because I know this was a lot of work over the last couple of years. And I know sometimes we really nail staff. So thank you. Very exciting to move forward here. Also, with all due respect, Ed, it is not building 6,000 new units over the next 8 years. It is feasibly zoning for those units over the next 8 years. And I think that's incredibly important because we're talking about building a database and scaling that in relation to the number of housing units that are in existence. So I say that with respect. Okay, so I wanted to talk about a few things that I hope will be included in this and in consideration as you guys are talking about the different options. One of them is really making sure that I understand that the cost shifts depending on the number of units that you cover. I think it's really important to cover single family homes because they are 25% of the rental housing stock in the city of Palo Alto, and that is critical. There are a lot of us families who are living in those single family homes, and I want to make sure that you include unlawful detainers and changes in tenancy when you're talking about building a database around renters here in our community. I also want to make sure that you look at other communities and how they have ensured that they are not passing through the fees to tenants. I know that is very difficult to do, but if you include rent changes and any rent increases in between tenancy that exceeds what state and local law would allow, you can probably highlight some of those things there. And then I also wanted to say, I've offered this in other times, I literally run a database that is mandated by HUD with 1,400 users and 180,000 unhoused neighbors. I am happy to help you think about this on the technical side.
Thank you. That sounds good.
First, I'd like to know who benefits from this program. I have heard nothing about the benefits of this, especially without some form of rent control. And in your report, you say there's a sizable number of low-income renters in Palo Alto. I'd like you to define what low-income is, because much of the low-income housing rental units no longer exist in Palo Alto. The people, if you ask city workers, there aren't even many six-figure Palo Alto workers who can afford to live here. So without rent control, this project is going to be onerous for both landlords and tenants. And at a $175,000 salary, somebody said, well, I'll take somebody in the audience. I'll come in and do that job. Please reconsider this, shelve it until you get more teeth in it, if you really have to have it, and until you prove to renters that it's going to be a legitimate, helpful part of the city. I say, don't pass it.
My name is Peter Harrisoff. I came to Palo Alto in 1998 to teach mathematics at Gunn High School, where I taught until my retirement in 2015. I've rented the same ADU for the last 25 years until today, and have been, I believe, a model tenant. During the time period, my rent has approximately doubled, so that I spend well over 50% of my after-tax income on rent. Sadly, my landlord informed me in February that this would be my last year here, and that I would need to vacate my cottage around December 31st of this year, so that he could prep their property, including my house, for sale, so as to maximize their return on their investment. I would very much like to continue to live in Palo Alto, where most of my friends are located, and where I associate with parents of my former students on the pickleball courts at Mitchell Park, and with my former colleagues at Gunn High School, but I'm very uncertain regarding my prospects of finding a place to live in this community. So I support the establishment of a rent registry, but only as a first step, and that it might help to stabilize the situation of people like myself. But even more, I think it would be important to extend the provisions of ordinance number 5543 to properties containing fewer than 10 units, and in particular to ADUs located on owner-occupied properties, as well as to rented single-family homes. I'm not sure how this relates to state law, so that's something that would have to be investigated. I think it would be desirable for the city to establish a rent control board to oversee and regulate rental housing in the city, and for the city itself to build affordable housing. I approached Project Sentinel, which is the organization that I think this council has designated for people to get advice from.
You're at your 2 minutes, so could you try to wrap?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so basically, they didn't even know about project ordinance 5543. So we need something more than that. Yeah, I had a few other things, but
Thank you very much.
Liz Gardner, thank you for having this tonight. I'm here to ask that there be more grit in this rental registry, that there be rent stabilization included. I also am asking that this very difficult proof of 3 times income to rent or 700 or better on a credit score with no evictions or convictions be included on this rental ordinance. It's extraordinarily hard. I just heard a very heartfelt story. I just foresee some trouble down the road for somebody trying to relocate. I'm trying to relocate in Palo Alto, having an incredibly difficult time because I don't earn 3 times income to rent. This really is not just about housing and live work reality. This is a life and death issue. Good rental homes are being ripped from under the feet of our own right here. We just heard in Palo Alto. Lease violations for children skateboarding, 3-day pay or quit, given out like poison pills, overcrowding, underhoused, overly burdened. This is no life. Example, 2 full-time parents with 2-month-old and 2 teens evicted, now squeezed into an 800 square foot, 2-bedroom, 1 bath, a 3-generation household right now, a grandma, daughter, and a baby grandson out by 1 p.m. tomorrow after weeks of attempts to get life moves to budge on a shelter bed, which is equal to 0 right now. What is Life Moves doing? What are they? Are they part of this eviction relocation money? How do families get access to that? Because they're giving this family the no. So a family of 3 with a baby gets kicked to the curb. How is this commission sitting with this information? Trading, as I talked earlier about fries, I won't go over it, but we need to act now. Is there a possibility of, this is the first time I've heard, I need to say about
your
these
time is up. Did
fees.
you wrap, please?
Yes, this is the first time I've heard about fees attached to this rental registry. We need to know more about what these fees are. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, I'm Mary Wheeler. I am the mom of 2 tween girls who've been in the Palo Alto School District since they were in kindergarten. I've been a renter in various places for over 25 years. 10 of those years have been in Palo Alto, which is an amazing community. We love living here. I'm definitely in support of a fully enabled and broad rental registry. Seeing similar in other places that I've been. My broader family is also a landlord. It's a very small and basic first step to understanding the landscape here and making good policy decisions. I personally, our family has experienced a number of the things that were described by previous speakers. We've lived in 4 separate houses while we've been here. In addition to multifamily housing, every single move is extraordinarily disruptive to our family and our kids. We're desired tenants, by any criteria. But for example, we just moved this past summer because they were selling the house that we had been in for a number of years directly across from our kids' school. This just happens. And I think when we choose where we will live next, we're going to look at the rental environment. Is it well managed, and are the regulations clear to both landlords and tenants? Is it a robust sort of market for us to step into? Because like many people here who rent, we're never going to be in a position in the short term to actually be owners in this town, but we'd love to be able to stay here because we have many friends and really love this, the people here in the community. So simple step to have a registry. Thanks.
Thank you. Next.
Hi, Council. My name is Emily Ann Ramos. I am with Silicon Valley at Home as a Preservation and Protection Associate. Since 2018, the City of Palo Alto has been working on exploring and adopting a package of tenant protection policies. Now, SB at Home worked in partnership with the City of Palo Alto from 2019 to 2021 as a community partner in the city-initiated grant, the Partnerships for the Bay's Future. Now, it led to the study of this issue, and the city demonstrated that lower income renters are particularly vulnerable to displacement, which is true throughout the region, but is particularly felt in cities like Palo Alto where the rents are extreme. The suite of protections recommended from that work were the tenant relocation assistance, rent registry, security deposit, and closing loopholes from state protections, right to legal counsel, fair chance ordinance. So we applaud the city council in their approach to tenant protections and look forward to the council taking on this rent registry, which was deemed as a top priority. Now, the rent registry ordinance has been on the books for decades. Enforcing it should be a top priority and will be essential in furthering tenant protection efforts. We do not support exemptions. 25% of Palo Alto tenants rent single-family homes, and they deserve support. At minimum, the rent registry should cover renters who are covered by any of the new legislation that the city has passed. That includes the new TREO, the local just cause, security, and the security deposit limit. We appreciate tracking a vacancy in the example registration form. We support taking it further by requiring landlords to submit eviction notices and unlawful detainers to the registry when they are served to the tenants. Should an error be discovered in the eviction process, it would be too late to help the tenant when the landlord reports annually. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your work on this. And I look forward to continuing on protecting tenants.
Thank you. Is anyone else?
Are people on Zoom going to get a chance to speak?
Yes.
We have 2 raised hands.
Okay. We have a speaker right now. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Lowing, Vice Mayor Stone. As I recall, the council direction on the registry was to focus on low income tenants. The staff analysis has all income classes. Low income and the other categories are based on the county median income by household size, and that's gross income. And low income is 80%, under 80% of that number. Typically, this kind of registry is useful if you already have some kind of rent stabilization, rent control, rent relief, whatever you want to call it. So there's not a dispute every time there's a complaint about what's happening on a particular property, but you already have the numbers. Here, you're just doing it for information purposes. But I think it's useful to look at the history of those measures here. Following Nixon getting rid of wage and price controls for the second time, there was a ballot measure here for a charter amendment to impose those price controls only on rent. It lost. A few years later, after Proposition 13, where people were told they're going to benefit from it, many people had their rents increased, and they were all called rent relief initiatives. And in cities that had a long-standing rental type organization, they were able to get their measures adopted. The person who initiated the one in Palo Alto was the owner of a shoe store, and his commercial rent had gone up. And then he asked me to coordinate the petition campaign. You've heard many times at the council how the people from Measure E collected so many signatures in 5 or 6 months to get 12% of the registered voters. But they did that with a validity rate of 80%, 5% or 90% of what they collected. So it's 100 signatures to get 90 or 85 good ones. We had only 3.5 weeks. And because of the people involved who were moving and the registration was different than where they were living, or they were from East Palo Alto and they signed it, or they signed it twice, was how angry they were. Our validity rate was only 75%. But in 3.5 weeks, we're all volunteers.
The timer's up, so try to wrap.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Okay. So the one thing I would suggest, based on past, in terms if you do this, is to not include properties with 4 residential units or less, one of which is occupied by the owner as the owner's principal residence.
Okay. Is there one more speaker here in-house? Okay, we'll do the one more here.
Good evening. Thank you for letting me speak today. Anil Babar with the California Apartment Association. I'll be the lone dissenter, it seems, in this room today, and wanted to highlight some of the concerns we have on our rent registry as we've experienced in cities that have a rent registry. One, the notion of a list of every tenant and owner in a publicly available database is of concern for privacy reasons. You can try to protect that, but any data that the city maintains is public data and can be subject to a public records request. In San Jose, for example, you can request the full database of the registry right now, and the city will send you every unit in the city and how much rent is paid for that unit. So obviously privacy is a concern, and I actually have requested that data and I've received it. So if you're confused about that, it is the case. Also, again, there's the necessity issue. You have available databases of information related to rent if you wanted to understand the rental market through whether it be census or CoStar data that is available today. So if you're looking for data, it exists. As you said, there would be a need for staff. We've seen in San Jose a ballooning of staff and a ballooning of cost fees associated with charging the property owner for this program. You can see a steady incline because as the program evolves, the program grows, the program costs evolve as well, and so there's obviously a huge increase to the cost of providing housing in Palo Alto. And I think in the last 20 seconds I have, I'm just going to hone in on the enforcement. Enforcement is always a challenge. Maintaining compliance is a challenge. You're going to actually add, and that's another source of staff growth. It's just the maintenance and compliance of the program. So, we're not in support of a rent registry for reasons because it doesn't address. It just addresses more burden to the property owner, and it adds more cost to housing. So I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. We can go to the online residents who'd like to speak now.
Yep. Our first speaker is Sue Allen.
Hello. I'm Sue Allen. I live near Mitchell Park, and we have an ADU on our property that was actually built before the house in 1947 and has been a rental unit pretty much ever since. We are concerned about this rental registry because frankly, we're unhappy about having to file more paperwork with the city and being charged for the privilege of doing so. I don't see the benefit for anybody for a rental registry unless you're doing rent control. If you're going to do rent control, then obviously you need it. But without the rent control, what's the point? There's lots of information out there about how much people are charging for rent. And so it doesn't gain the city anything except more bureaucracy. I especially think for privacy reasons, particularly that owner-occupied ADU kinds of units or ADUs on owner-occupied property should be exempted. I don't want to put out there as the only unit we have of how much rent we're paying and who our tenant is. We're good landlords. We had one tenant for 17 years. The one that we have now has been there for 11, and it's below market rate. So I think this is just a nuisance thing that's going to get in the way of people building ADUs. Why do I want to build an ADU when it's going to put my private information out there and I'm going to have to go through all this paperwork every year? If you want me to register once and say, yes, I have an ADU, and then let it go, that's okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, next speaker. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Daryl Tamander. Daryl, if you could unmute yourself so that we could hear you.
Are we unmuted?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. I'm Nancy Tamander. We bought a big boarding school house building. It's now deemed historic in Barron Park in 1980. And so we raised our family, 6 children in the main house, and there's an attached back wing that was part of the boarding school, and we rent out 7 bedrooms. And we have been doing this since 1980. Our tenants, it's way below market. We started charging $350 deposit many years ago without a first and last month rent. And it's still the same. And it's, you know, I just can't even imagine that I would have to keep track. And for all the same reasons that the last speaker, Sue Ellen, said, it just is a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork, and for no benefit to the people that live here who are paying for a big giant bedroom and a kitchen and 3 bathrooms around $1,000 a month. We're way below market, and we are not taking advantage. We feel like we're almost providing a service. And you know, we would have, if we get charged a lot of money, I mean, first of all, I can't understand when you have 7 single individual people, 1 per bedroom, would we be paying a percentage of their rental? And 7 bedrooms. Yeah, we wonder what a unit is, but would we be paying a percentage of that 1,000? I mean, we would obviously have to pass this cost to our tenants, which I think is a really big darn shame. Do you have anything else?
Thank you. Are there any more online comments?
Yep. Our next speaker is Cam.
Hello. So I've been a renter here in Palo Alto for about 7 years now. Moved mostly around the downtown area. First of all, I think this rental registry is a great idea to gather data about what's going on in our city rental. I hope that it leads to further actions. I think one of the great things about Palo Alto is we've seen homeowners get appreciation of their homes over time. They've been able to protect their investment by having their costs fixed due to Prop 13 and some of the other protections that homeowners have. Unfortunately, many of these protections aren't extended to renters. There is a rent control at the state level now, but that is a much larger rental increase per year than things like Prop 13 have for the owners of the homes that are landlords. I find it also be useful to determine areas where you see landlords that are increasing rent quickly after. Moving is a difficult process. Often if you move outside of your county, you have to re-register for voting, and it makes some of the political discourse issues more challenging. It also has a high cost of moving your entire life. So finding out which landlords historically have raised rent immediately after that first lease is over would be incredibly useful as a renter who's shopping around, trying to find landlords that are not as predatory in their pricing structure over time. I already use things like Zillow and public databases when shopping around for different rentals. And I think that's a useful feature that would be incredibly beneficial to renters to have, even if it came with a small cost. I'd be happy to pay that to make sure that I have some protection from the risk of a sudden price increase that might force me into having to move or disrupt my life in order to try to handle a change in pricing. So glad to see this. Hopefully it leads to further action dealing with the supply issue of housing that is a huge problem in Palo Alto and the surrounding area, and appreciate the time to comment. Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Our next speaker is Joanne.
Oh, hi there. So my name is Katie. I'm here with Joanne, who is my broker. We are both property managers, and we manage over 240 doors in the Palo Alto and surrounding areas. We're here today just because we have so many landlords or housing providers who are in a situation where they, bought their homes back in the 1950s and 60s. They're now in assisted living or memory care, and their children are renting out the properties in order to help offset those costs because memory care and assisted living is so expensive these days. So the idea of charging our housing providers more in order to pay for additional people's salaries, in order to enforce these new rules, in order to do all this extra admin work is a little bit concerning for us, just because we know that this rent is not going to somebody's pocket in order to just, enjoy life. It's going to the benefit of an owner who's probably in their 70s or 80s who needs assisted care. And we're just concerned that this cost, as other folks have mentioned, is going to be passed on to tenants in a way that makes rent even more, prohibitively high. Yeah. That's all I've got. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see any raised hands.
Okay, so that concludes public comment on the agenda item. No. Oh, yeah, of course. I thought you meant tonight. Yeah, absolutely. You can email the whole council. You can email the two council members here. You can email Director Light. Definitely. Okay, so we're going to pick up the agenda item. Is there any particular way you would like us to address this or structure it? So one option is we could just take some of these on the key considerations, a couple of these top ones, and kind of see where we go on that. Skip maybe some of the other ones like implementation for now, but then go back to the ordinance, which picks up a number of the things.
Oh,
so in other words,
sorry, council member. Looks like somebody had just raised their hand. I don't know if you want to honor that now. You did close the public comment period, but wanted to flag that.
Okay, there's just one. Okay, let's go back to it. 2 minutes.
John Elman. If you could unmute yourself, and you have 2 minutes to speak.
Okay. Can I speak now?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. I've lived here in Palo Alto for 60 years. And in case anybody around the table doesn't remember, at least twice, the general public in Palo Alto has voted down rent control because they've seen what happens in other communities that have rent control, which is fine for people who say, oh, my rent has been doubled in the last 25 years. That's less than 3% a year. Take a look at your food costs, gasoline costs. Seems to me if the city council wants to do something about helping tenants with the rent, they'd stop raising the gas and electric bills. Those are going out of sight. I'm in a competitive business. I own 2 little buildings downtown. I saved money, I invested, and these are my retirement income. And it seems to me to put more bureaucracy out there, I'm going to have to just charge people a rent and then an extra fee like the restaurants are doing now. Here's the price of your food. Here's a part of your service fee. You know what I mean. I think you must include all types of rental units if you want to get an accurate picture of what rental story is about. ADUs, individual homes, and so forth. I would be curious as to how many landlords there are. People constantly quote that there are 11,400 rental units. I want to know how many landlords are involved and how they've been consulted and surveyed and so on about this whole business. So I appreciate you're trying to protect some tenants from outrageous landlords, but the marketplace kind of does that. And I would just, I don't know, my rents are still over 20% lower than they were before the pandemic. Has the city council done anything to help me get my rents back to where they were 3 years ago? is there any consideration or acknowledgement, or is any council member ever been a landlord or property owner? Those are important questions, I think.
Okay, thank you. Now we will close public comment. Okay, what I meant by my comments there, just to, since staff has put up two key considerations of at whatever slide that is, slide 10, I just thought we'd start there because they're kind of big issues that you want some feedback on. And we'll just kind of move on from there. So all rental units, buildings over a certain number of units. You want to kick it off, Grit?
Thank you. And yeah, first, just want to thank staff for taking this as one of council's top priorities and moving this forward. And overall, very happy with this program, especially to see where it was. It's in its initial phase when it came to policy and services last September, and where it's come. So appreciate that. A lot of discussion around whether we need a rental registry. I think Ms. Ramos said it really well, said he's been working on several renter protections. Staff gave us a good recap on that as well. And I think anytime we're dealing with these particular issues of renter protections, someone on council always asks the same question regarding like, well, is this something that is, is this a necessity? And asking generally questions about data, since we tend to be so data driven. And the answer is always the same by staff, which is we don't know because we don't collect that information. And a very wise person told me recently, you can't study what you don't measure. And to quote another speaker tonight, this is a small and basic first step. And I think that's exactly what this is. We need to have this information. We don't know what we don't know. And so I'm excited to be able to finally have this rental registry. Few questions then, sticking to these first two key considerations. I understand the HRC discussed some of these exemptions. I was curious, did the PTC discuss exempting ADUs from participation as was discussed at the HRC? I didn't see that part in the staff report, and I didn't get a chance to watch the PTC.
Great, thank you, council member. I'm going to introduce Rebecca Atkinson. She's a planner with our office and the project manager for this. So would you like to give us an update from the PTC?
Sure. All told, the PTC recommended approval of the ordinance that you saw before you. The only difference were the track changes that staff did after and in response to the PTC. So the PTC did recommend inclusion of all rental units, similar to the Policy and Services Committee. It was the HRC that recommended support for the basic framework of the ordinance and the registry, but they wanted additional consideration of possible exemptions.
Great, thank you. And my understanding was really they encouraged a discussion by council of that. Okay, wonderful. And so the PTC discussed those possible exemptions, but decided to recommend it would apply to all units.
I don't remember that was actually, I wouldn't characterize that as a major component of the discussion at PTC.
Okay. So on this, I think one of the public speakers mentioned, and I've heard this thrown out several times too, about concerns of a chilling effect on rental housing if this were to apply to single family and ADUs. Do we have any non-anecdotal evidence that would support that? I've talked to several, especially kind of rental housing advocacy groups about this, and they've all said there is no evidence that there's a chilling effect. Has staff found any that maybe further supports then this kind of staff recommendation as well about the consideration of the 3 units or less being exempt?
Yeah, I don't believe there's any empirical data on that.
Okay, thank you. So I've I was of the mindset when I was on policy and services discussing this, and it hasn't changed now. We're doing this registry in large part to collect data. Single family homes are making up 25 to 30% of a rental housing stock. And by exempting those types of houses, we're weakening the integrity of our data. And again, this is meant to support our staffs and our decision making moving forward as we continue to consider future renter protection policies, and having the data that that really shows a holistic view of our city's rental stock is critical. So I would not be supporting having exemptions. And another, I believe this did come up at the PTC discussion briefly. I thought an interesting argument around the concerns of discriminatory housing practices and the concerns that within single family and ADU units, by not having any type of oversight of those units, that we could see potential kind of proliferation of those type of practices there. I thought that was another kind of interesting angle to look at this on why collecting that information continues to be important. I think I could see maybe some fee waivers for things like I think one of the public speakers talked about. I couldn't quite understand the point, but I thought I sort of interpreted it as if you have family members renting a single family home for while the owner is sick or something, burdens on that. I could see maybe some limited fee waivers for a situation like that. But I wouldn't want to see major, and I won't go too far into fees right now. But I don't think I'd want to see major fee waivers in this program, because I'm concerned that means that we're just pushing the fees off to then more multifamily housing. And well, I'd ask if we have the data, but we don't. That's why we're looking for this. I would imagine that we have lower income earners likely in more multifamily housing than we do in single family rentals. So those are my thoughts right now on those first two key considerations, and then I've got several others when we come back from that.
Okay, yeah. So my views on this is that we don't want to give up 25% of the housing units in terms of the analysis. Starting first with ADUs, give you a real life example of data that we don't have on ADUs. Because when I was on the planning commission, we were looking at trying to make ADUs even more affordable, because we assumed that they were affordable, but we didn't even know. We needed that baseline before we could make a motion to council that we should make them, more affordable by some action. Staff did their very best and came back with some estimates of what they thought the rents were in ADUs. And I asked for the source of the data, and he said Craigslist. And I said, well, then does it say ADU? And he said, no, they're just the cheapest. So I think it's Craigslist. And I'm completely sympathetic with that issue. So we need some data on that. There's no constraint that ADUs have to be rented at all in the city or in the state. So I think that they should be included with ADUs specifically. Given that we have everything in there from mom to your son to a pool house, I would be happy to have ADUs come in for the first registry without a fee, so that we get high compliance and so that we know exactly what's in there. So for our first baseline, I think that's a way to, take off any of the cost burden or paperwork burden. In general, any kind of landlord, including ADUs, we really need to be sensitive to the cost and paperwork burden, because we obviously want to encourage housing. I have a little bit more sympathy of possibly exempting these very small units. But again, for the baseline, for the first year, I would just like to get the data. I mean, I learned something tonight from a public speaker about some what we call naturally affordable housing on some of those low units that she's renting out, which is fantastic. It's another example of, we don't even know that those exist maybe. So getting some visibility on that would be really helpful for us to plan and look forward. So again, the first time through, counting all those, even very small, at no fee, just to get compliance, I think would be helpful. So I think that addresses that. In general, I think when we go to the question of fees, which is a little bit later in your staff report, I think we should be at the low end of that range that you gave us, which is about $50 to $200. And frankly, I would be comfortable suggesting that we use partial cost recovery, because somebody that has 100 units times $50, that's per unit, that's probably okay. But if we're going to get into the $200 range, that starts to be quite burdensome, and just another sort of, mark against Palo Alto, which we want to encourage housing. So let's make it easy. When we get to the parts of, in terms of fees, when we get to the parts of the repeat fees, the renewals, I'd also like to see if there's a way to kind of maybe only require updates quarterly as opposed to monthly, just to kind of reduce the workload. So that kind of tone in terms of fees, I think, is where we need to go on that. Okay, you want to jump into other things, or we can just go down the items as they're listed in the actual ordinance, the first one being the initial registration?
Chair, I just wanted to offer on the fees as well.
I heard a voice, but I didn't know.
I know, sorry, I have a whisper. Sometimes it comes out loudly, sometimes it doesn't. I just wanted to make sure that it's also in the mind of the committee members for a program that is not fully cost recovering, that's coming from the general fund at the end of the day for the actual cost to the city. And so just continuing to bring this in context of all the other things you have going at that point, it would be a trade-off of some sort for other programs that the council has interest in funding. So the fees actually link to also what you're willing to commit from the general fund.
Good.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Conn-Gaines. And I think when this does come back, whether the referral is to bring this to council or whatnot, being able to have maybe a breakdown of looking at 50, 100, 150, or the 200, the far range, what that then means for the general fund for that trade-off. Because then also understanding that means less money for all these other housing priorities that we have as well. So I think that would be useful. Okay, so we just kind of going now into not quite
just as
organizing the way to go through the.
I just thought a way to organize it is just go because the first one on ordinance is initial registration, then registration renewal, then the information that's required, and if we want to make comments on any of those, that way we are at least covering it.
It's okay with the chair. I'll just go through my.
Yeah.
I didn't organize it.
No,
that
I'm waiting.
way. So okay, thank you. Sorry, staff. You're gonna have to deal with two different approaches here. Okay, so one thing I wanted to pick up on, because I was concerned about a language in the ordinance regarding privacy issues. So subsection C. I give everybody a chance to flip to that. So that says that under the California Public Records Act, individualized rental registry information may be disclosed. Can you explain that a little more? Like, what kind of information would that provide in the event of a PRA request?
Oh, great. So I'd like to now introduce Jennifer Fine to respond to that question.
Thanks. Good evening. I'm Deputy City Attorney Jennifer Fine, and I'll address this question. The reason we specify individualized rent registry information is because the kind of larger statement is that staff won't be posting the individualized information. This kind of like live database is not within the proposed ordinance. So we're stating that on our own action, we're not going to be distributing the individualized data. However, through a public records request, people may receive data about individualized units still, though we will be reporting an aggregate The individualized information will just depend on the information collected. Most of the information, as far as I've seen proposed that we would be collecting, would be considered public. It would be kind of the things that would be posted on the listing if landlord were trying to get new tenants. So we're not really considering that particularly private.
And I can also add that a couple pages into the ordinance, you can see attachment B has the list of information that we anticipate collecting.
But so, yeah, so what I'm trying to get to is, and I think there is a potential narrative out there. We heard it tonight as well. This idea that that somebody can make a PRA and get all of the public information about people, I think individual people's kind of living situation. I guess let me give an example that's easier. Let's say I'm a renter, so make myself as the example. Someone would not be able to make a PRA request and say, I want the rental information of Greerstone in Palo Alto. And then they're going to be able to get Greerstone lives at this address, pays this much rent, is, under whatever. It doesn't collect that information. It doesn't collect the personal information of the actual tenants, correct?
That's right. Currently, there's no proposal to collect the names of the renters or anything like that.
But if I maybe can ask a question, we do collect information on rental units, and if somebody knew where a tenant were and to look at the data, they'd be able to back into how much is being paid.
Yes.
Looking at the registry.
Yes.
Yes. Would that be broken down? So I appreciate that. So would that be broken down further into specific like unit number, or just this is what's paid for this type of unit for a 1-bedroom apartment at this apartment complex?
I think essentially if we collect the data, then it would be subject to the Public Records Act. And again, if it's something that would be, in a public listing, then it's not something we're considering either a business interest or that type of very personal private information that we sometimes can protect under the general public interest exemption to the Public Records Act. So to the extent that we're collecting, this is the unit number, this is the address, and this is the rent, all those could be distributed together in a records request.
Okay, thank you. That makes me feel much better about that. Well, okay, so great. So since I have you, might as well ask my other law question on enforcement and penalties. The one thing I'm curious about, I know we don't have specifics yet on the actual what penalties would be assessed, but do you see any way that it would be lawful to structure the penalty for non-compliance to prohibit a landlord from being able to increase the rent during the time that a landlord is out of compliance? Essentially a rent moratorium until that rent is paid. I'm sorry, until the data is entered into the system.
That's not something we've considered so far, so I don't know if that's within kind of the scope of what I can answer off the cuff.
Okay. So
did you just to clarify, and we may have some information from other cities about that, was it a rent increase moratorium or a rent collection moratorium?
My question was rent increase.
Right. Okay.
That's not rent collection.
Right. That's consistent with our. I think there's some examples, right, in your research about that. Other jurisdictions that have a provision just like that.
It might be structured like the specific points of process might be differ from one to another, but yes, there are cities that require landlords submit information about a forthcoming rent increase, and that get reviewed by the city to make sure it's within allowable rent increases, and they have to do that before the rent increase would come into effect.
Okay, and I was actually thinking of something else. So, but perhaps there's more research that we need to do on that. I in that example that Miss Atkinson, sorry about that. Oh my gosh, described. I'd be wanting to understand again. So I'm sensitive about staff resources, and so and you're hearing some sensitivity about budget. So there's a couple of different hats that we're also trying to wear. If we're reviewing that is a much more robust program than having a we're trying to transition this to be a more automated system where we can. So that sounds like a level of human engagement in the system that we hadn't anticipated thus far.
Okay. Yeah, and yeah, I hear that concern. I'm interested, and so I think this would be one of those areas would be helpful to kind of see how successful other cities have been with just a penalty program, and if they're not seeing the type of compliance that is going to be necessary for this to be an effective program, I'd like to see what else can we do to really have teeth into it. So if we can do it with just penalties, great, but I'm not sure. And I know Mountain View has struggled for a few years to really be able to get their compliance up. I hear it's like around 80% now, but that's been after several years. So let's see.
And that may also be opportunity. I'm just jumping in while you're checking your notes. That may also be opportunity for the scale up option in this program too, knowing that you want to do the program and maybe not be able to accomplish everything the first year, like you've mentioned, Councilmember Lowing. So maybe that's something where if you aren't entirely clear based off the research we see for other cities, that's something you could tweak between a first year of the program and a second year of the program. So just getting it established being, it sounds like one of your primary goals.
Great, thank you. Do you want me? I just have a few more. Do you want me to continue, or we can trade off?
Or I can piggyback with you. We got all kinds of options.
Okay. Why don't we do that? Give me a little break.
Okay. I had one other privacy thing in you at some point in 9.65.04, I'll talk about trade secrets and proprietary information, which is not going to be exposed to the public. But what is that? Tell me what that is.
Yes, we put this in as a reference to the exemption in the Public Records Act for trade secrets and proprietary information. From what I've seen so far, we wouldn't be collecting anything that we would consider a trade secret or proprietary information. It's the kind of information where the value of it is derived from its secrecy. Its value goes down the more, like if it is known. Those kinds of things might be if we're purchasing a software or an algorithm. You know, the algorithm or the software code itself is proprietary information, so we wouldn't distribute that exact formulation. We've considered arguments that rent is proprietary or trade secret, but again, because it is widely distributed as part of its normal business practice to attract tenants, we don't really think that it fits into the Public Records Act's exemption.
Yeah, I would think rent, you can find that out by walking in the door and saying, I'm looking for an apartment. What does it cost? So.
Yes, that's part of our understanding too.
Yeah. Go ahead. If you're ready to go.
I'm ready. So one thing, actually kind of wanted to follow up on something Councilmember Lowing was talking about, the possibility of like waiving fees in that first year. I know that's interesting idea. Again, it'd be good to be able to compare that to general fund obligations, what that's going to look like. If we go down that route, and I'm open to that, I'd want to make sure though that we're still assessing penalties during that time, and maybe it's a 2-3 month warm-up period. But I think we need to, if we're not assessing penalties, we're not going to get any compliance. Mountain View, before they had any type of consequences or penalties, had a 9% compliance rate within their program. So I would imagine we should be expecting the same if we don't do that. So we want to make sure that we continue with that. And then again, overall, I'm happy with what I'm seeing here. I do think, and I heard a couple of public commenters mention this as well, would like to see within the tenancy information section under reason for current vacancy. So this is not in the ordinance, but in the form. I think we should be including unlawful detainers and 3 days notice to quit as well in there, to be able to further understand. And I understand that the Stanford log, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, thank you, Director. Like some program within, I think, the Stanford Law School that helps local tenants. Apparently I was told that they only will help if it's an unlawful detainer. And so having that information would be able to kind of also help us understand how adequate that program is, because I have heard people say, oh, well, we have that Stanford program. Do we need our own? So again, I think this is going to help form future policies, and so understanding, okay, well, how few of these evictions are being caused for something like unlawful detainers, and so how helpful is that Stanford program to the city of Palo Alto would be helpful. So I'd like to see those two things added into the reason for current vacancy section. And then I think my only last question here is, so I was unclear about staff's response to the PTC's like minimized reporting recommendation. And so is staff in agreement with that recommendation and is only including that we don't collect fees on those event-based reporting? I guess I'm just kind of confused about PTC recommendation, staff's thoughts, and where we're at.
Sorry, just for clarification, you're referring to packet page 5 of 9 under the paragraph minimized reporting?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. In general, then it's well taken to try to streamline and reduce overall frequency of reporting where possible and so forth. But in general, you have the initial registration, and then you would have a registration amendment, the following year and so forth. So it would be like once a year, either you would be registering, and then if nothing happened the second year, it would be an annual affidavit or renewal that way. If you had an event that was a key event, like a vacancy or a new tenant or an eviction or any of these event-based reporting, we wouldn't want to have necessarily a penalty or a fee to submit that type of timely information. But at the same time, PTC was considering or suggesting potentially, if you have done some kind of event-based reporting within a certain window, then you wouldn't have to do your annual affidavit or your annual renewal. And that's the time when we would be collecting the annual participation fee. So staff didn't necessarily see a way of streamlining that particular thing.
So the way I also understand it is we want the annual registration to be a part of the system. And so the PTC was asking to, waive that if there's a qualifying event. What we're saying is let's have the annual fee, at the regular schedule, and throughout that reporting period, we don't charge for any any additional changes that may be required throughout the year. So we always collect the fee, but you could have access to it throughout the whole year to make changes without a fee.
Gotcha.
That's how we've tried to address the commission's concern about, trying to reduce the frequency of reporting.
But a landlord still has to report within a time frame of a vacancy.
They do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. And that's what's in the ordinance now.
Yeah, one of the things we changed in the ordinance in response to that PTC concern was in the event-based registration amendments, we asked for it to be reported within 30 days. The concern from PTC was that, 3 or 4 events may happen week after week, and then they expected to keep going back to the registry and making those amendments. So we put a larger time frame on essentially at the end of it, let us know what happened. Additionally, we removed one possible event-based registration amendment requirement, and these are options that you can consider as well. Other ways to streamline would be to reduce other event-based registration requirements.
Yeah, that was actually the next section I was going to go to as well. So this is ham and eggs is working real good here. On the event-based registration amendments, we need a good acronym for that. Just to make it official city business. What I was referring to just a little while ago is that, you know, if somebody has 100 units in their building, that's not a lot of buildings, but they could be every day having a change. You know, somebody moves out, somebody moves in, they change the rent or whatever. So I wouldn't want them reporting every day just because it was a change. And I'm not sure that we actually need them to report every month. Once we have the baseline there, what about quarterly? I mean, that would reduce our burden as a city and their burden to fill out all the paperwork. So if that puts us behind in some way, you know, that's the question I'm asking. Because I mean, I can see large landlords having to hire a person themselves, a half-time person to do all this management, if we have to do it like 30 days from the moment that it happens. It just doesn't feel like we would be penalized by not having that data come in every 90 days or so on. And then of course we could look at it in subsequent years.
So maybe just a clarifying question. Are you suggesting that there's no update at the event, but you collect the events and then you update them at a certain point?
It's like estimated taxes. You have 4 dates at which you report.
Yeah.
Whatever happened in the first quarter, then you fill out a report within 15 days or that, or you could have it even due at the end of that day, end of the quarter.
And so within that reporting period, though, you may, you're reporting, so there's a vacancy, you fill it. So you're reporting that there was a vacancy and that you filled it and you give the information, but you don't do it at the moment, you do it at the end of the quarter or whatever it is.
Yeah. I'm just saying that could end up with 4 reporting periods instead of 12, or if we really want it 30 days from when the thing happens, you could be doing 50 reporting periods.
Right. And we can give some more thought to that. Yeah, let us think on that.
If it somehow compromises the data that's actionable, that's a problem. But I was just thinking that if we get it within 90 days updated, it's not going to change that much, I wouldn't think, in most buildings.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, we can take that. Did you have something to add?
I think that also might, I mean, with the request to incorporate additional information on evictions or notices of eviction and things like that, and adding a timing within 30 days, or then thinking about maybe it's not within a certain time frame of the event, it might be just quarterly. It might, in terms of the quality of the data and so forth, you know, I guess it would be like, how soon are you interested in getting certain types of information? Like if you want to get information timely on a potential eviction, that's one thing, but maybe some of these other things might be, the reporting frequency could be less. It depends on the policy direction or the freshness of the data that you're.
Potential eviction would be an item that is a good counter to what I'm saying, but I didn't think that as a percentage of the things that the person is going to be recording, that the business is going to be reporting, that's going to be, I mean, that could be exception. You could say it's 90 days except this and this. Mm-hmm. And if the data is late coming back to council by 90 days, we're used to that. So, you know, I'm hoping that we're going to have the narrative that this is good for everybody. Eventually, it's for the landlords, for the residents, and obviously council as well, so we can help create some policy decisions. And I don't want to send out the other message that we're doing everything possible to make it hard to get renters in or put buildings up. So any way we can streamline that, I think we should. As I guess was pretty consistent with what PTC already said. In your table 1, pardon?
Can I do a follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks. So just because I thought the point about the eviction concern was my concern with this as well. And we've seen apartment complexes over the last year or so kind of doing quick mass eviction notices, and it took a long time for the city to be made aware that these were happening. And thanks to groups like PARA and other advocates, they were able to bring it to our attention. And so I would imagine staff is kind of thinking that, yes, this is going to be used to inform our policies, give us good data, but that it could also raise a red flag when those type of events are occurring, correct? And the same thing, I would imagine, like unlawful rent increases too during a short span of time. I mean, is that something that staff envisions this being used for?
Eventually, yeah, I think that's maybe part of a phased component, but I'll look at my colleagues to see. Yeah, please, if you have more to add.
I think that this addition in this underline and strikeout, basically the underline within 30 days would be a pretty important policy consideration for you as a committee as well as at City Council.
Where are you now?
Under event-based registration amendments.
So page 3.
Page 3.
So yeah, that's where I am. Oh no, I don't have the red line version. That's why.
So staff added this in response to the PTC suggestion for streamlining, because if you give a certain window period for people to be able to register or do an event-based registration amendment, that might be somehow helpful for some of the example reasons that Jen Fine just shared. But I do see this as a potential policy consideration, and perhaps the underlined within 30 days could be removed, but that it could be, or it could be a different time,
Well, you might choose to have 2 sections there.
Right.
One for routine, just
exactly.
Here's who moved in, who moved out, and others for what Vice Mayor correctly called, emergencies or red line situations that we can help prevent.
And I think that's a really good point of the differences there, because the administrative consideration for the staff running the program will be significantly different for routine things versus some of these more egregious, larger eviction cases that you're speaking about. And so the frequency that's occurring probably will be less. And so having that be within a certain number of days would be more helpful for the city to know, as opposed to the routine things, which could possibly be quarterly. And I think that's definitely, something to think about in terms of the phasing, that we can try it out as that 2-tiered and see how that works, and reevaluate from there as you go forward.
That works. Thanks.
And I also just like to reference other registries that we've tried at the city that if they are too onerous or don't have the compliance, things like the Vice Mayor reference make it difficult for the data to be useful. So I think that is really important for us to create something that we can actually maintain and use in a useful way to inform the city, as opposed to data collection for data collection's sake, and not in a sustained way that gives us what we're actually looking for.
That was an externally important ad. I wasn't trying to pull those out, so that's going to be have that chat. I was going to ask you on table 1, page 5, are ADUs actually in here? If so, what classification? I don't see that specifically.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. On the table in the staff report, I don't believe ADUs are listed. This is census data.
Okay.
And I don't believe we have that information. I mean, we obviously know where we've issued permits for ADUs, and that can be fed into the model.
Right, which is about 600, 700, something like that.
About that. In the recent time frame.
Right, so that's another 5% add that would be. Okay, the other thing that's somewhat related to what we just talked about is that when they have to give their quarterly reports or whatever they are, I was wondering if if there was a way, and this might be harder than the subject we were just on, but if there's a way to have the larger landlords report by size of unit, for example, so my little example I wrote together is a 21 unit building. We have 10 one bedrooms, 8 2 bedrooms, 3 3 bedrooms, but group the data for each of the bedroom numbers. I mean, you could do that for rents, for example. So there might be a way to streamline the form itself so that you don't have to, if you have 100 units, you don't have to have the whole thing listed out. It could just be all the one bedrooms rent and things like that. So as you get into the finer design of the form, to the extent that they can group data and give us what we need, we really need to be doing that. So I also salute PTC for saying that, we need to see the exact, eventually we need to see the exact form. And I think Director Late, you were a little concerned about taking that back to PTC because it might delay getting it to council. So one option for that is that, we could bring it to this committee and maybe even have the chair of the PTC attend. So we could, have a 3-person discussion point for feedback to you. That's just another option. Or we can send it to PTC. The form for sort of proofing to see if all the data is there.
Sorry, did they not?
They asked to see it back.
They request, right. And I don't think the form was complete. We had the data that we were going to collect, but the form, they wanted to see the final form.
Oh, but the data,
they were aware of what we were going to collect.
Okay, so they just haven't seen what it looks like in its pretty final form.
Correct.
Okay.
In terms of how difficult it is to fill out and how time consuming and stuff like
I'd
that.
just like to offer one piece that you wouldn't know, because when we were talking with our vendor, they did say that there is a way for them to import like a spreadsheet. So if a property that has a larger set of units, if they've got a spreadsheet, there's a format that they can just import that into the system. So it'll decrease the amount of data entry that's needed for those particular sites.
I mean, my thoughts are, I don't think we need to send back to PTC the form. I was actually really impressed by the form. I hate filling out forms. I did a little exercise filling out kind of the information from my own apartment, and that's without my own expertise of being a property owner, and I was able to get through it within 10 minutes. I mean, I think it's straightforward, it's easy. I assume it's all going to be little pop down windows that you complete. I mean, this is not an onerous process in any stretch. And so I think if I can do it in less than 10 minutes, I would imagine a landlord who's going to have to fill out several of these is probably going to be able to get to the point where they're able to do it within 5 minutes. I was concerned about possible onerous actions having to do the annual form and having to fill out for every single apartment, but what you just described makes me feel even better about that. So if that's the only thing that we would refer back to PTC for, I don't think it's worth putting that onto a PTC agenda, and even more so than delaying this coming back to council when we have said this is a top priority and we want to start collecting this information as soon as possible.
Totally concur. That's why I brought it up. Yeah.
Awesome. I would love to keep that in administrative land if that's possible. Thank you.
In terms of fees, I don't know how much we need to talk about that, if any, tonight. But any comments? I had said earlier, I think we should try to be at the low end of that range because we are trying to recover at least some of our costs, but we're not trying to make it expensive to do business here. So I don't agree. You want to weigh in on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned earlier, I'd like to see when it does come back to council, just a range on 50 to 200, what that means for the general fund. Is there a possibility of, I don't know how we would do it. It's probably a question then for the attorney. Anything that we could structure to prevent fees from passing through to the tenants? That I doubt we can, but also, well, I mean, even if it was the high end, $200, what does that mean? $16 extra a month. I don't think we're going to have a 200, because I imagine the fee is per unit per year, right? Okay, so that work breaks down to $16 a month, which is not terrible. My rent goes up far more than that every year, so that's not terrible. But I also don't think we would be at the $200 a month. And I'm leaning towards Councilmember allowing. I mean, saying if it's not fully cost recovery, I think that's fine. But again, want to further understand impacts on the general fund. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, there's a lot of things we do as a city where we don't get enough revenue to cover it, which is why I know there's a trend to try to cover it, and that's, you know, admirable. But you know, we don't want to send the wrong messaging here. In terms of giving direction to staff, do you have any further comments on if we want to take a stance tonight on exemption ADUs and smaller homes, as well as smaller rental units, as well as potentially waiving those fees?
So, question for staff then before we get into that. If a motion is made on some of those modifications, is the idea that that will then be revised and this then comes back to council for okay, great. And okay, great. Then I'm yeah, happy to move forward if we can figure out where we I saw Director Lake taking a lot of good notes.
All his notes are perfect.
Great.
On the fees, I did want to note, with the current cost described in the staff report, that does not include enforcement. So we will do our best when bringing this back to the council to estimate cost in as much as we can. But I did want to make sure that was clear. This is to run the program, to get all the data. It's not all of the compliance dreams that we have in mind. So the general fund burden could potentially be more, or it could be a resource allocation question of staff being pulled from something else to do this. So we will do our best to be able to quantify that or at least describe it. But I did want to make sure that you were aware of that.
No, just give you an idealistic thought, not a quantitative thought. That I'm hoping that the idea of if we make this, you know, not too onerous and not too costly, then we're going to have a lot less enforcement and collections and all that. So, you know, make it sort of an incentive to, you know, the first time through, for example, in ADUs, let's not make it cost anything. Let's just get the data, and maybe we get 75% right away, and that's a lot more than we have right now to know of the ones that are being rented what it's going to cost. So we have to do enforcement. Don't misunderstand that statement. I get that, but there are ways to build in, you know, goodies into this so that it helps that you don't have to do as much enforcement. Obviously, that's better.
And I think there's different levels of enforcement too. There's the software will help us be able to report information, and again, we'll try to automate what we can. And so maybe there's, you know, just different tiers. So it sounded like Mountain View's experience, you know, sort of ramped up over some time. I would expect our program to have, you know, some, you know, growing pains too, and we would adjust. And maybe we're not as we want to get compliance as quickly as possible, but we may have to feel our way through that in the initial years.
Yeah, and I think that's fine, but I think we want to make sure that we're learning from the lessons of those who've come before us and recognize what happened with Mountain View. We don't want to repeat that. Thank you to Mountain View for taking that first step. So good. Should we attempt to motion? Is that what staff's looking for?
Yeah, sure. I think just to make it simple, relative to the draft right now, I think we want to maintain this program for all units and not exempt any. And the second thing is to exempt initial fees for ADUs and buildings smaller than 5 units.
What does that mean as far as percentage of?
You know, so let's look at the graph.
Okay, so we're looking at under 5 units.
Yeah, so that takes away 13% if we go with that.
And this doesn't have to be a motion, by the way. It's kind of weird voting of 2.
Well, it's just
It'll be
giving you feedback.
Consensus is fine.
Consensus?
Yeah, consensus of what you prefer.
I think this group of two has consensus on that, so.
I agree. I just think it would be very funny if there was one yes and one no, and you just keep canceling each other out. But I think consensus enough so staff knows what edits to make before getting it to council.
Well, another way to do that is just to say that, we recommend your proposal here on the rental registry program with that one exception. Because fee waiver to ADUs and less than 5, I think I said. Because that's kind of what you want, and then you can add whatever else you want on top of that.
Like, it's from the staff perspective, like writing the staff report when this is recommended to council, can you only say housing ad hoc committee recommendation if we actually make a motion, or is just the conversation enough?
There's no downside to making a motion.
As long as you can agree in advance to support.
Anything else that you put in there? What is this, Rev 23? We support Rev 23 here. So I guess we would put it in the context of, approving moving forward with the RRP with that one change.
Sorry, what was the one change?
No fees for ADUs or under 5 units.
And I heard initially.
For the first year.
So it's basically the ordinance that we have before you, and the fee. And then there was a number of comments that came up that we'll go back and if the ad hoc is okay, after we collect a little bit more information, if we're informed in some way or another, we will write that in the staff report and say, here's, something that the ad hoc didn't consider. They asked a question about it. Here's some information. If you want to implement it, here's how you would do it.
Or even further, if the idea of every 30 days somehow looks bad and you come back without that, then that's okay.
Yeah.
Right. Because it still has to go to the 7 of us on council. So
sounds good.
Oh,
And we have the additional financial information that you requested. We will do what we can to include that in the staff report.
and are we including, or does it need to be in the motion, including unlawful detainers and the 3 days notice to quit to reasons for current vacancy?
So we have that. So I think we're good. I think
it's not in the
motion. I understand.
No, sorry. It's not in the, when you say we have it, you mean in your notes or in the actual?
Our notes.
Okay.
We know that the ad hoc has an interest in that. And so that's one of the things that we'll take a look at and we'll adjust it. So again, this motion's a little funny. What we're hearing generally though, is that you support the program as it's been drafted. There are some questions, a little bit more work for us to do. Shouldn't delay us in getting it back to the city council. So it may not be 100% the way that you saw it here today, but we'll certainly flag anything that was different and make sure that we're clear about that.
Yeah,
so we'll respond to your inquiries in the staff report. And if we need to make an adjustment into the ordinance to respond to that, we will note that in the staff report and make that change in the ordinance. Okay.
yeah, I'm just suggesting we do this tonight because then you don't have to bring this back to the ad hoc. Yeah. I mean, you can, but you don't have to.
Yes, let's move it on.
The other note that I had actually to do with the event-based registration amendments. So I don't know if you captured that one or not, but the idea of less frequent reporting. Okay, great.
Well, I'll second your motion.
Okay, well then we all have a vote too.
Yes.
I think you can record it as unanimous.
We'll see.
Yes, I'm a yes.
I guess I'll yes.
Okay. This wouldn't be good for to have a tie tonight. Oh, I'm sorry. I almost forgot to say that I really appreciate getting data points from the other cities. Not that we ever should exactly duplicate that, but it's a lot of nice things to consider as we try to make a decision. Oh, I thought you had to make a comment or announcement or something. All right. Well, then we have completed our agenda, so we stand adjourned. Thank you.